Hi guys, so I did a video about a week ago about the current avian influenza bird flu outbreak that's currently affecting us here in the UK and across Europe. And there's been some changes in the rules, some significant changes that you all need to be aware of, and I'm going to talk to you about them now. So in the last video I spoke about the need just to up your biosecurity measures to try and make it so that your food and drink that the chickens had available to them were, away from where wild birds can get to, and the need to disinfect your boots on your way in and out of your chicken areas. But the rules have actually changed, and there are some quite significant changes coming in as of the 14th of December. I said this in the last video, but I think it's important to stress it. This affects you if you have one bird. If you've got one duck that's a family pet, one chicken, one turkey, one goose, these rules apply to you. And they also apply right up to other keepers like myself who have over 100 birds. The new rule changes are quite significant. I've got them in front of me. I've actually got the guidance direct from the government, and I'm going to read some of it in bits and bobs throughout this video to really avoid any doubt in the clarity of what I'm trying to convey, because I think it's quite important. But the takeaway, the main point that we need to state is that your birds, as of the 14th, will need to be shut inside or netted with some netting that's going to stop wild birds getting to them, and that will be the law. There's no date for how long that's going to last. It'll be very much dependent on the outbreaks and how they continue. So here we've got, these are my wife's Brahmas. They've got a nice big shed there that they spend most of their time in, but it's not quite big enough for them to live in 24 hours a day. So we're going to have to extend the shed somehow just outside it. Sorry, it's this side. We're gonna have to extend the shed somehow just outside it with something that's completely chicken wired off so that wild birds can't get in. We're talking small wild birds as well. So I feel terrible for a lot of our birds. We're going to be forced to keep them in humane conditions, but nowhere near the conditions in which I would really want them to be in. We're going to have to restrict the amount of space they've got far more than I would like to do, than I would normally be comfortable. Anyway, about the legislation. So basically, new housing measures, and I'm reading directly from the government material here. New housing measures, which will come into force on the 14th of December, mean that it will be a legal requirement for all bird keepers to keep their birds indoors and to follow strict biosecurity measures in order to limit the spread of and eradicate the disease. So it's really important to state that there's not any significant risk to humans. We're not talking about a disease that can transmute into humans easily. The only people at risk from this disease are people who spend a huge amount of their time in very confined spaces with a lot of birds. Those are the people who might want to consider the health risks to humans. But for us, people like us who are keeping our chickens outside normally and just keep them as pets, there's no risk of transmission to humans to speak of. I will speak a little bit more about that, again, directly from the government advice. Public health advice is that the risk to human health from the virus is very low, and that food standards bodies have been advised that avian influenzas pose a very low food safety risk for UK consumers. It does not affect the consumption of poultry products, including eggs. So we're certainly not going to stop eating the eggs. There's no reason to believe that there's a risk there, and we should all just carry on as normal. Government Chief Veterinary Officers are encouraging bird keepers to use the next 11 days, now I'm a couple of days late getting this out to you, but until the 14th, to prepare for new housing measures, including take steps to safeguard animal welfare. Consult your vet where necessary and put up additional housing. These housing measures are to basically extend the biosecurity regulations that were already in place that I spoke about in the last video. So the measures you should already have in place are, well, again, quoting directly, such as cleaning and disinfecting equipment, clothing and vehicles, limiting access to non-essential people on their sites, and if this is more for commercial arrangements, you know, workers changing their clothes and footwear more frequently, things like that. So again, what we're talking about, what we're trying to mitigate against is the avian influenza, which is in our wild bird population, being transmitted to our domestic birds. So what you need to think about is all over your garden is going to be bird droppings, and every time you walk to or from your chicken run, you may or may not be picking up that pathogen on the soles of your feet, and if you then walk into your run, you are potentially contaminating it and contaminating your birds. So it's really important to reduce the frequency with which you're visiting your birds, but also to put some biosecurity measures in place at that point. So that could be a foot dip, like a foot bath, or it could be a change of shoes, a pair of Wellington boots by every chicken house, so that you're changing into them every time you're going in and then taking them off again when you come out. Whatever measures you put in place, you know, that's the point at which they're going to matter the most. We're going to be the ones who are most likely to infect our own birds if we're not careful. So the guidance goes on to say, and this is to reiterate really what I've just been saying, is whether you keep just a few birds or thousands from the 14th of December onwards, you will be legally required to keep your birds indoors. This is quite important. Or take appropriate steps to keep them separate from wild birds. Now this to me is super significant, because we would be forced to cull a significant number of our birds to meet the legal requirements if they were solely to keep your birds indoors. So we're going to be doing, like I mentioned here, we're going to have a small area just outside that we're going to net with some chicken wire, which is going to be to stop that movement of the outside birds to coming into contact with our birds. So I'll just say that again, from the 14th of December onwards, you'll be legally required to keep your birds indoors or take appropriate steps to keep them separate from wild birds. I'll get into the details of that in a second, but to me, that's a super important point. We've not taken this decision lightly, but it's the best way to protect your birds from this highly infectious disease. So that's what we're going to do here on where our two larger flocks are, where the trailers are. We're going to be sourcing some really large netting, and we're effectively going to net over the top of both trailers and then pin that down to the ground around the outside so that they can still get out. They won't have access to nearly as much ground as I would like, but they will still have access to get outside, and I think that's all I can do. We're not in a position financially to be able to purchase the amount of housing that we would need to keep all these guys locked up safely and humanely. There's only so far I can go when it comes to sacrificing the well-being of what is essentially a living being that is dependent on me 100% for its well-being. So there has, you know, I'm going to have to walk a line there. But as I said, it's quite clear in the guidance. Again, reading directly from the government literature, it says poultry and captive bird keepers are advised to be vigilant for any signs of disease in their birds and any wild birds. Seek prompt advice from their vet if they have any concerns. You can also help prevent avian influenza by maintaining good biosecurity on their premises, including, and I'm going to run through that list next, but the first thing I want to do is just talk about what it just said. It's really important, if you find a dead bird lying on your lawn, whatever bird it is, be it a crow, a swan, or anything in between, that you report it. You report it to DEFRA. If you go online and just Google government avian influenza, you'll find the website with all the contact details really, really easily, and report it so that they can check that bird to see if it has in fact died from the avian influenza that we're worried so much about. It's really important that we monitor it and that we know what's going on, because as much as we as bird keepers might think, well, I can't wait for these restrictions to be lifted, and I can't wait for these restrictions to be lifted, at the same time, it does me no good to have the data be artificially massaged to make it look like there's less cases than there is, just so I can release my birds, because this is for all of our good. It's for the good of us and our birds. So if there are still significant numbers of cases out there, I want to know about it so that we know we're doing the right thing by our birds. Not just the easiest thing for us as keepers, but the right thing by our birds. So the steps it now says to take. Housing or netting all poultry and captive birds. It's really quite clear there in the wording, housing or netting. So there's been a little bit of misinformation that I've seen already about people thinking they have to put their birds inside. Now, of course, if you have that capability, if we only had 4 or 5 birds here, we would absolutely keep them shut in, because that would be in their best interest. But we have too many to do that. We're going to take as many of our birds as we can and put them in enclosed runs like this one here, and some others that we've got dotted around. We're going to have as many like that as we can, but all the others we're going to net it. So I'm going to repeat that again because I think it's so important. Housing or netting all poultry and captive birds. And from the 14th of December, that will be a legal requirement, don't forget. The next point, cleansing and disinfecting clothing, footwear, equipment and vehicles before and after contact with poultry and captive birds. If practical, use disposable protective clothing. Now, don't forget, these guidelines and measures are aimed at everyone. So a lot of them won't apply to us if we only keep a few birds. If you run a big commercial poultry business, then you are going to have vehicles moving to and from site. We're not going to have that here because our vehicles don't come up into this area. But all of these that apply to you, if that makes sense. Reducing the movement of people, vehicles, equipment to and from areas when poultry and captive birds are kept, to minimise contamination from manure, slurry and other products, using effective vermin control. So again, what we're talking about there is reducing the amount of vermin like rats that would start life one side of this fence and move the other side. We need to picture the fence, or whatever the outside of the boundary your chickens are in, as a biosecure barrier. Anything that passes through it is potentially bringing avian influenza with it. So that's where we need to focus on not letting things transfer, because again, we're talking about wild bird droppings that are just in the ground, on the ground. Thoroughly cleaning and disinfecting housing at the end of a production cycle. Now, again, this is more aimed at commercial breeders, but what we're going to do is we're going to disinfect and put a load of lime down and all these sorts of things that we would usually do anyway at various times throughout the year. We're going to make sure we do them all on one day so that we're all as good as we possibly can be the day that we net. Keeping fresh disinfection at the right concentration at all points where people should use it, such as farm entrances. Now again, we're talking larger production areas there, and before entering poultry and captive bird housing and enclosures. So we're talking about, again, at that biosecure barrier at the edge of where our birds are. Minimising direct and indirect contact between poultry and captive birds and wild birds, including making sure all feed and water is not accessible to wild birds. Well, we should already have done that. I don't know if you can see back there, we've still got a drinker out there, but it's actually not being used, it's empty. So their drinkers are now inside the housing. And that is one of the treadle feeders that wild birds can't access. So we've already done that. You all should have already done that. The new housing measures will be kept under regular review as part of the government's work to protect flocks. The introduction of these new measures follows a number of confirmed cases of avian influenza in the UK. And there have been a number. There have been 6 cases of H5N8 just in the last few days. They are becoming more and more frequent. If you keep over 50 birds, it's a legal requirement for you to register your flock. And if your flock is registered with, I think it's DEFRA, then you will automatically get these updates that I get. And I get an email every single time there's a new confirmed case. And I've witnessed the acceleration in the frequency that I'm getting these emails. So the problem is certainly getting worse, not better. There's also been H5N2 cases, although fewer of them. They're just 2 different strains of the same virus. Now, you don't have to have 50 birds to register. You can register your flock even if you only have 1 bird. Personally, I recommend you do that because that's the best way of getting up-to-date information, but not only up-to-date information, correct information that is aimed at you where you are, and you don't have to rely on second and third hand information sources, which in this day and age we know might not always be accurate. Now, I personally have done the best I can to just read you the information that's coming directly from the government. I've obviously given you my opinion at the same time, but my opinion is worth only that. I'm trying my best not to put any spin on this at all. So you can go online to the government pages for either England, Scotland, Wales or Northern Ireland, and wherever you live, if you're in Europe, you're probably experiencing something similar, and if you're further afield, you may or may not have something similar now or in the future, or have already experienced it. But you want to be checking with your local government sources for changes in the information. Remember, I put the last video out no more than 2 weeks ago, and things are changing significantly, so keep yourself updated. The food safety advice for cooking poultry and eggs remains unchanged. So just the final summary we get here at the end. In light of evidence from the continent and ongoing high numbers of findings among wild bird populations in England, the risk of incursion of avian influenza has been increased to very high for wild birds, medium to poultry with high biosecurity, and high to poultry with poor biosecurity. So we're looking after our own birds by doing this. Avian influenza, and this is important. I don't think any of my viewers, my subscribers need to hear this, but it is important to state the final thing we sign off with. Avian influenza is in no way connected to COVID-19. It's in no way connected to the pandemic. That's caused by a very different virus, SARS-CoV-2, which is not carried by poultry. They're completely different things. So in the coming days, we will be putting up netting, changing our practices. I will show you that as we do it, assuming I can, assuming it's convenient, I have the time. Please look after your birds and do the right thing. That's about it. That's going to wrap this one up. If you find these videos valuable, there's several ways you can support them. Please make sure you subscribe to my channel. Press that like button, which you can do right now, costs you nothing. Leave me a comment down below. Let me know what you're doing. Let me know if you think I'm right, if I'm wrong, how I'm wrong, how I'm right. Please also subscribe to our channel and press that bell button so that you get notified when I make a new video. If you want to go a step further and support me even more directly, please do go to patreon.com/self-sufficient-hub and become a patron. Every little tiny thing you do to help us makes a huge difference. So with that, thank you ever so much for watching. I really appreciate it, guys, and I'll speak to you guys soon.